First of all, I'd like to thank all of you and especially the organizers about this great idea to bring us together, because good ideas are flying somewhere in the universe and they land down in a different speed in some countries, maybe first in Finland, then in Estonia, so we in Latvia are following. And we indeed appreciate the work done by our colleagues. We know about the ongoing processes in Lithuania, and we see a lot of common. Maybe the speed is different. And thank you, Rita, for already giving some answers to my hypothetical questions about the system of education in Finland. But now I try to perform impossible mission to tell you about all this. I also would like to use the word mess in education in Latvia as well as in teacher education, covering a lot of issues, because indeed everything is in the move. All systems have been reformed from top till bottom. And here you see some key points, what we are trying to change. First of all, we are introducing so-called competence-based approach in curriculum. It's a huge project, partially funded by the European structural funds, involving more than 1,000 teachers, bureaucrats at several ministries, almost all universities dealing with teacher education, and I'll tell you about this a bit more later. Second, we are restructuring the school network. We are making new quality requirements concerning centralized exams, and we are debating the very idea of centralized exams as such. Language issue is very important in Latvia, so we are at the final phase of switching to education only in the state language in Latvia, and last but not least, we are performing some changes in teacher education system. I doubt I could cover all these issues within a half of an hour. Therefore, I'm not going to speak about some also urgent questions as the school, beginning of school age, the length of school year, changing of scholarly qualifications and so on, but they are also under discussion. So this big project about competence-based approach. As you see, the main goal is to develop, approve and successfully introduce such a curriculum and approach to education which would develop a value-based knowledge, skills and attitudes necessary in the 21st century. But what's behind these loud phrases? So we are going to change what we are teaching, not only how, but what we are going to provide as a contents for our students and how we are going to involve them in this process. It's a project for 5 years. It had begun on 2016 and it will be over on 2021. And we have approximately 700 opinion leaders involved in this. Almost all schools participated in the project. We have some pilot investigations, different expert teams covering fields of studies, and all this is still under the discussion because not everything is clear. Our teachers are quite resistant to these changes. They actively participate in the process, but they are not afraid to express their doubts about, let's say, diminishing the contents of a subject you mentioned, and if I'm exaggerating, the fear of teachers and some representatives from wider society, we are teaching our students to hide their ignorance under developed transversal skills, communicative skills, ways how to behave yourself, and so on. And I'm also a bit skeptical about this approach, because I am very pro-subject oriented. It would be the next step we could discuss in our teacher education. But let's hope for the best. Our teachers are very smart, and we all hope they could use this competence-based approach in a best way. How we are going to introduce this new curriculum gradually, of course. We are beginning from the next year, when it will be applied for preschool education. Then you'll see gradual implementation in several grades, but not like primary grades and then secondary grades. No, grade 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, and then you see the next levels, because the different teaching materials have to be prepared, teachers have to be trained, and we have some central examinations after the 3rd grade, 6th grade, 9th grade, and 12th grade. And the contents of these exams also have to be prepared. And we also use this division in key domains. They correspond to the recommendations of OECD, to the recommendations of UNESCO Council Education for All. So these key domains, also disputed, where languages, public relations and citizenship, cultural intelligence and art competence, mathematics and technical competence, it should be there, science and engineering, IT competence, health and physical activity. And there is still discussion, could we destroy our present subject system? The answer is perhaps no, but again we have to use these cross-cutting and transversal skills, including self-assessment, creative thinking, cooperative skills and digital skills. But what's new in our system of education? Clear definition of so-called values or virtues we need to develop as responsibility, honesty, smartness, empathy, solidarity, and tolerance. And it's the most tricky issue. Good teachers all the time have taught their subjects in such a way to develop these human features, but no, they have to put them in some, let's say, more bureaucratic framework. How to do? It's under the question. So we are actively working. Next year will be the first year with full-blooded implementation of the project during preschool. Let's see what's come out of this. We already have predicted some results in these key domains, taking into account these ties between different elements. If you have this presentation, you can see these possible links. And we also have a definition how we want to see each student. It's in Latvian, but Lithuanian colleagues could at least catch the very idea. Yes, we have defined, let's say, the future human being. And there are definite goals how we want to educate this. The next is a very painful issue for us. It's restructuring of school network. And this is our present minister, Kārlis Šadurskis, thinking about the ways how to reduce the extra number of schools. Because in Latvia, where the density of population is very loose, we have very special proportion according students and teachers. 8 till 9 students per one teacher, and it is the lowest in Europe. And therefore schools are half empty. Very few students in every classroom, no competition, low wages for teachers, because we have the principles that money follows the student, and therefore the plans are to reduce the number of secondary schools drastically. Out of more than 300 secondary schools, to leave approximately 100, and also implementing the principles that the first 6 grades should be near to the students' homes, to reduce small schools, not because of teachers' salaries, but because of quality criteria. But because our schools, as in Finland, including secondary schools and opposite to Estonia, are municipal schools, they sometimes are the only employers in the village, and therefore resistance is very significant. And of course it has an effect of quality. The results of centralized exams are witnessing this. And therefore we did complex research. We developed mapping of school network in Latvia, but with a lot of additional information. Here you see the address, and these maps are interactive. This is only one out of 20 maps, and clicking on a certain school, you can clearly see the number of students, number of teachers, results of centralized exams, and we also think about mobility. So roads, school buses, maybe teachers' mobility, all these factors have been taken in account. No, this is let's say a matter of political decision. We'll have elections next month, so let's see. Would it be possible to move this very logical reform out of the death point? About quality requirements. We have centralized exams and some tests after 3rd, 6th and 9th grade, and we measure the results in percent. And making the long story short, our minister wants to close all the secondary schools where the results of centralized exams are lower than 40%, and maybe in the future lower than 60%. Because in order to get a certificate, a student must have only 5% of performance, and some schools are covering the percentage, let's say from 5 to 20%, and their students are not competitive. And last but not least, it has an effect on teachers' salaries. Unfortunately, this was the main issue for discussion with our trade unions. They are not so interested in quality issues. And maybe this year we were successful enough to quit the discussions about teachers' salaries. And we are not proud about the figure, indeed. It's much more lower than in Estonia, maybe a bit similar to Lithuania. So since this year, our teachers will get 710 euros per one workload. But different other payments are not included, so average salary is about 1,000 and for all the population in Latvia. This issue would be also very important for us, and unfortunately it brings a shadow to all the situation of our system of education. It's very hard to speak about prestige of teacher's profession if your salary is so low. It's a problem which follows us on every step. Then, important issue is the issue of language in education. I'm not going to repeat in this audience that we are ensuring mother tongue education for all historical minorities in Latvia. We have primary schools in 8 languages, secondary schools in 6 languages, and we are introducing elements of bilingual education already since 1988. And it's also not necessary to remind you our history, why it's necessary, because here is such a phenomenon as Russian language self-sufficiency. Our graduates speak Latvian for more than 100%, but the level of Latvian language skills should be higher. And therefore, we already implemented an article about obligatory studies of the Latvian language while establishing minority schools. During the second stage, we already introduced elements of bilingual education, so since 1992, at the same time creating curricula and textbooks in minority languages too. The third step, maybe the most famous, was the introducing of bilingual education, 2 subjects in Latvian in primary schools and 3 subjects in Latvian during secondary schools, and programs of bilingual education, including 4 models. And since then we have created a lot of textbooks. Here is a homepage of our Latvian Language Agency. You can click on this, you can find hundreds of materials for Latvian language acquisition for minority schools. Now it was the famous stage 4, protests against System 60/40 in secondary schools and all minority schools. Protests are taking place since 1995. The contents is not changing, the results too, but they take place. The last one was last Saturday, but now we are in the situation where most of schools are implementing the 3rd model. It means approximately 60 till 70% in Latvian, but now we are in the next stage. Our parliament approved amendments that we are switching to 100% of education in the state language, except subjects of national identity, like Polish language and literature, Russian history, and so on. And examinations will be only in Latvian. And next stage would be after next year, when we are going to introduce multilingual model. It means Latvian in practice English, and for minority schools education in Latvian, also from kindergartens. And our goal is to quit with the system of separate education, because we still have Latvian schools and minority schools, in practice Russian schools. Russian schools are teaching in Latvian, but children are still separated. We have to break this system. And we have defined several results of this system, and I hope it would be successful. Well, about changes in teacher education system, because our universities have to react to these changes. Now we are carrying on 3 big European projects concerning teachers' education. Our plans are to educate approximately 400 teachers by 2020. Of course, priority is so-called STEM teachers, because here is a serious lack of teachers. Almost half of schools are lacking some teachers, especially in STEM subjects. Situation is even catastrophic, therefore the merging of schools could be a solution, and also raising of salaries. And we are restructuring our teacher education programs. And as University of Latvia is not the only educational establishment, we also teach teachers at University of Daugavpils and Liepāja. We develop specialization and cooperation. By the way, last year University of Latvia merged with so-called Teacher Education and Management Academy, which was specialized teacher training educational establishment. The process, despite of very heavy protests, is a success story. Now we have common programs, branches in 8 cities of Latvia, and more motivated and qualified professors. As for state-funded study places, as this is very demanding profession in labor market, we have most of the study places state-funded. It's opposite to the general practice in Latvia, where 2/3 of students are paying by themselves. And as you see, this year we have 1,453 BA level study places and 462 masters. And we have one common doctoral program in pedagogy for all the universities, but universities still have separate doctoral programs in educational management. As for approach, maybe the discussion about priorities, are they subject-oriented teaching or pedagogy-oriented teaching, is over. Now we have something like Finnish systems that teachers for subjects, especially after the grade 7, had been trained at the respective faculties, but you call them class teachers, very good term by the way. We use a bit more sophisticated description, could be trained at the faculty of pedagogy and psychology. Some professors prefer this integrated approach to teach subject and pedagogy simultaneously. Some prefer this step-by-step approach. You first receive your BA in some field and then you get teacher's qualification. We allowed for both models to exist. I am strongly pro-subject oriented, my colleagues are not, so we found such a balance for transitional period. But taking into account that we need teachers desperately, we are very active in creating short teacher qualification programs for those who have their knowledge in the field but have no teaching rights. And also, if you are, let's say, teacher of mathematics and want to get qualification of teacher for chemistry, you can also enter such a short program. We also have academic programs, both in program teacher and educational science, and one, as I have told, one common doctoral program, pedagogy. Some facts about our university. About 15,000 students, 200 of staff, and why I am showing you this. Maybe everybody of you knows the central building of University of Latvia. It's the very center of Riga, but we are building new campus. The first building is already functioning. The second building will be opened December this year. And in this new campus you see House of Letters. The House of Letters will be ready after 3 years, and our teacher trainers will have maybe the most modern building in Europe. So we already know where we are going to sit, where will be our teaching auditoriums and so we have such a very bright future prospects, inspiring us to develop better teaching training programs. And here you see how our House of Letters would look like. I suppose very nice, and really it's a very inspiring moment for our staff. What we are going to do in the future? We are going to develop new forms, methods and approaches, including development of multilingualism, taking into account different mother tongues of our students. A very important point is diaspora education. As for Lithuanians, we have developed a lot of online materials for diaspora education. We have summer schools for teachers. We have more than 100 Sunday schools. We do some first steps for education for refugees and asylum seekers. We have only tens of them, but anyway, we have to be ready. Lifelong education, distance education, and last but not least, cooperation among different actors and countries. And therefore, I'm very grateful for your initiative. Indeed, we have a lot in common to discuss, and I look forward to future meetings, and thank you once more.